Today we'll be looking at the pipeline for getting a character successfully exported out of Character Creator 4 and imported into the Massive Loop Metaverse. Now, to keep things simple, we are not going to be spending a lot of time creating a character in CC4. There are hours of online training that can take you step by step through that process. However, we'll be focused more on what settings we need to set for our character and what adjustments we need to make in order to streamline the Massive Loop process. Let's load up a character. So here we have the character Camellia. She is a pre-made character from CC4. If you don't recognize her, it's because I have made some small changes to her, like adding some scars on the face, giving her a shaved head, and giving her some different clothing. Now to start things off, we'll want to position our character into a T-pose position. We recommend using the T-pose as this will prove useful later on when we'll need to align anchors to our characters in the Massive Loop SDK. Now, much like Camellia, default characters from CC4 are already rigged. This has made it remarkably easy for us to test the rig and see how our character deforms. If we look down, we can see a box with the word motion. Let's hit the drop-down arrow. We'll see a list of different poses that we can pose our character in. If we select one, our character will change to that respective pose. This is how we are able to easily change our character's pose at any time. So let's go ahead and put her into a T-pose. Another nice feature that CC4 provides is a large amount of morphs or blend shapes for the face. To access these morphs, we'll need to open up the Facial Profile Editor tab. If you don't see the Facial Profile Editor tab, that's okay. You can select Window and activate it there. You can also hit the hotkey F8 to open it. Once open, we'll be able to see the morphs that are connected to Camellia. Let's click on the Edit Expression button. This will allow us to access our character's individual morphs. If we look closely, a lot of these morphs have been split up to have left side and right side movements for the face. This is great for high-end rigs that require the characters to need isolated key actions, such as a one-eyed wink or a half smile. But for Massive Loop, we will need to keep it a bit more simple. So we are going to use a number of these morphs to create our own custom morphs. Let's click on the eye blink category. Here we can see two different shapes. One morph for eye blink L and one morph for eye blink R. If we move their sliders left and right, we can see how they affect our character's face. Now, since Massive Loop does not allow for two different blend shapes to drive a character's blink, we will need to create a blend shape that uses only one slider to drive a character's blink. Let's go ahead and adjust the morphs to make the expression we want. In our case, we are going to move the sliders of each eye blink to 100%. Once done, let's hit the button New Slider. We should see a window pop up. For categories, let's create a new one and call it Eyes. And for the name of the slider, let's call it Eye Blink. Okay, make sure current morph is selected. We're not going to include a thumbnail, so let's just go ahead and hit OK. Now it's time to test our new slider. In our expressions, we should now see a category called Eyes. If we select our category, we'll see our new slider Eye Blink morphing just like we'd expect it to. Now we will also want to create custom Vizime expressions for our character. But in order for us to use these Vizimes in Massive Loop, we will need to make sure they are all being driven by morph shapes. What does this mean? It means not every expression in CC4 is driven solely by a morph shape. Some of the expressions are influenced by a joint. If we go ahead and select the jaw category and move the slider of jaw open, we can see that the movement is what we would expect. The jaw opens and the jaw closes. The problem is the slider is not only driving a morph shape, but it is also driving the rotational values of the jaw joint as well. So, if we were to bring our character into the Massive Loop SDK without baking it into a morph shape, we will get some pretty undesirable results. So let's begin. Let's go ahead and select the jaw category. Let's go to jaw open. Let's move the slider to 100%. Now this is the expression that we're wanting. So let's go ahead and export this shape. I'm going to go to File, hit Export, OBJ. Here we will go ahead and select Keep Facial Expression in Nude Bind Pose. We will select Full Body and then Export. Go ahead and hit OK. Next, let's navigate to our project files and create a new folder. Now in our case, I will call it Morph. This is where we will save our exported morph files. For this shape, I will keep it the same name as the slider jaw open. Great. Now let's go back to our jaw open slider. If you look close, you will see a little pencil icon to the top right of the slider. Let's click on that. This should open up the expression slider editor window. Here we will go to File. We'll hit Open Folder. And let's navigate to our newly exported OBJ. We'll select it and we'll hit OK. Once the OBJ loads, we should see the jaw slider move to 100%. Now, if we move the slider left and right, we can see that the jaw opens and closes. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and repeat the same process for the remaining jaw expressions. I am also going to do the same process for the tongue as well. I'll pause the video while I do this, and when I am done, our jaw and tongue will all be driven by morph shapes. Now that we have all our mouth movements being driven by morph shapes, we can now begin creating our custom Vizime shapes. This process becomes identical to the way we did the eye blink. The first Vizime on our list is called SIL. This is short for silence, and this is going to be your character's default face when there is no audio. So just to keep it simple, I'm going to find our mouth base category. Here, we will find mouth frown left and mouth frown right. I'm going to move their sliders just a little bit, let's say maybe 15% for both. Perfect. Now let's hit New Slider. And we're going to make a new category and we're going to call it Vizimes. Now let's go ahead and name our new shape to SIL. We're going to make sure current morph is selected and hit OK. We have now added our first Vizime shape. If we select the Vizime category we created, we can see our new shape SIL has been added. The next one on our list is the Vizime PP shape. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go to the category jaw. And for jaw open, I'm going to put that at 10%. Okay, and I'm also going to go down to jaw forward. And I'm going to make that 50%. Okay, now I'm going to change categories. I'm going to go to mouth blend. Now under mouth blend, we'll see mouth roll in upper left, mouth roll in upper right, and I'm going to change those sliders to 100%. Just below them, we'll see mouth roll in lower left, mouth roll in lower right, and I'm going to change those to 80%. We're going to change categories again, and we're going to find mouth base. Here we can find mouth dimple right and mouth dimple left, and I'm just going to move those to 30%. And then for our last category, we're going to find cheek, and we'll find cheek puff left and cheek puff right, and we're going to just move those to 10%. Okay, this looks like it would do for a good looking P shape. Let's go ahead and hit New Slider. And this time, instead of making a new category, we are going to apply it to the Vizime category we created. So let's click on this arrow and select the category called Vizimes. Now under name, we're going to name our shape PP. We're going to make sure current morph is selected and hit OK. Perfect. Now, with the Vizime category selected, we should be able to see both our newly created Vizime shapes there. For the rest of the Vizime shapes, I'm going to go ahead and pause the video while I finish creating them. You can find a list of all the Vizimes needed for the Massive Loop SDK at docs.massiveloop.com under the Avatars section. I will also provide a text document showing what shapes and settings I use to create which Vizimes. So you will be able to create them all based on my settings. But keep in mind every character is different, so values may vary from character to character. Now that we have created our Vizimes, we only have one more hurdle to overcome. As of now, the Massive Loop SDK only allows for blend-shaped Vizimes to be on one mesh. So, in order for us to get our Vizimes working properly, we will need to merge all the meshes that have the Vizimes on them together. So how do we do this? Well, if we go to the toolbar and hit Mesh, we can see that there is a command called Merge Mesh. But as of now, we are not able to select it. So, in order for us to merge meshes together, CC4 requires them to share the same materials. So, first we will need to merge the materials before merging their meshes. Let's go ahead and open up the Modify window. Here at the top right, there is a checkered icon that represents a materials list. Go ahead and open up that tab. We can now see a list which represents what material and what shader pertains to what mesh. If we look at the top of the window, we'll be able to see a button with a square and a circle on it. Let's hit its drop-down arrow. We will see a command called Merge Material UV. Go ahead and select it. We should now see a list of our meshes, and we can select what UVs we want to combine together. Let's make sure everything except the brow is selected. Once done, we can select what size of texture we want. Let's make sure it's 4096 or 4K. And now let's hit Merge. CC4 will prompt us with a message, and that's fine. Let's go ahead and hit OK. Once CC4 is done processing, we will now be able to merge those meshes together. So let's open up the scene window. Let's select all of the body meshes that we want to merge. Go to the title bar and select Mesh and hit Merge Mesh. The Merge Mesh setting will open and we will need to select which mesh will be the target mesh. I'm going to select the CC base body and then hit Merge. Under the scene window, we can now see all of the body meshes have been merged into one mesh called CC body. Okay guys, now that we have our character in a good place, let's go ahead and export our character. Let's go to File, Export, FBX, Closed Character. This should pull up our export window. Under the Target to Preset, we are going to need to select Unity 3D. Under FBX Option, hit Mesh. Max texture size, let's just do 4K or 4096. And under Other Settings, we're going to say Delete Hidden Faces, Bake Diffuse and Spec Maps, and we're going to hit Export. Great, now let's hit OK. Let's create a new folder, and this is where we're going to export our character to. Let's go ahead, name it, and I'm just going to name mine Camellia Rock, and name the file the same as the folder. And now let's hit Save. Okay, we should now be ready to bring our model into Unity. Go ahead and open up your Unity project. Now I am currently using Unity version 2020.3.35 F1 with the standard 3D scene as my template. Under the Assets folder, let's create a new folder. I'm going to name it the same name as our character, Camellia Rock. Now let's go find our exported files from CC4. Here we can see the 4 files which CC4 created when we exported them. Go ahead and select all the files and drag and drop them into our Unity Camellia Rock folder. Now once we have done that, we should get a pop-up window telling us Unity wants to fix the normal maps. Go ahead and hit Fix Now. We also want to change our rig from generic to humanoid. Perfect. Let's drag our model into the scene. As you can see, it's not loading our model exactly the way we would expect it to, but that's okay, because Real Illusion has made a plugin for us to use. Let's jump back into CC4. At the top of the toolbar, you should see a command called Plugins. Let's click it. Here we will find an option called Character Creator and iClone Auto Setup. Once we hover over that, we should see Get the tool for Unity. Click on it. Now our web browser opens up and we should be directed to a Real Illusion web page. At the top, there is a free download button. Let's hit that. Here, we will have 2 options to choose from. I'm going to go ahead and download the HDRP10 version since that falls within the Unity version I am using. Once you have downloaded that and extracted the files, we can jump back into our Unity project and drag and drop that plugin folder into our Assets folder. Once loaded, we should see the Real Illusion plugin appear in the Unity toolbar. If we click it, we should then see an option for Import Characters. Let's go ahead and select it. A Real Illusion window appears and we should now see a list of our CC4 characters. Let's keep everything at default and go ahead and click on Build Materials. If we select our mesh, we can see the Real Illusion plugin has created standard materials for each of our models. However, it looks as if we did not get the most desirable results with our model material. That's okay. We can quickly fix it. We go to the inspector and expand its materials property and voila, it seems to fix itself. Once we are all done fixing our material, there are still a few settings we need to tweak manually to get them to render correctly. The first will be the material for the body. If we look at our mesh, we can see that our character's eyelashes do not look like eyelashes, but rather a bunch of planes. If we look at its materials property, we can see it is opaque. We need to change this to cutouts. Once done, we should see the eyelashes. We also see the eyebrows need some love. So let's select them and navigate to their material. Go ahead and change its setting from opaque to fade. We should now have nice looking eyebrows. Now, if we open up the prefabs folder under our character, we can see that the Real Illusion plugin did create a prefab variant for us to use. However, since we do need to do some cleanup to Camellia Rock, we can go ahead and delete this prefab. Great. Let's select Camellia Rock and take a look at her hierarchy. We can see that not everything was entirely removed when we merged meshes in CC4, but instead, some history has remained and has been converted as empty game objects in Unity. So to make our file a bit cleaner, let's right-click on Camellia Rock. Go to Prefab and hit Unpack. Now we can go back to Camellia Rock's hierarchy and delete the game objects we do not need. In our case, it's everything but CC base body, female brow, and RL bone root. Once finished, let's select Camellia Rock and drag and drop her into the prefabs folder. Now our character is a prefab and we are ready to take our model through the Massive Loop SDK process. When getting a character ready for the Massive Loop SDK process, the first thing we want to make sure of is that we have the Massive Loop SDK installed. Let's open our browser. Let's go to www.massiveloop.com. we'll need to sign into our account. Once done, at the top of the page, you should see an option for download. Click it. We should then see an option for Massive Loop SDK. A new page will open and we will see an option to download the Massive Loop SDK. Go ahead and select it. Once finished, drag and drop the SDK package into our Unity Assets folder. A window will open up showing us the contents of the package. Let's hit Import. A Massive Loop tool should appear in your Unity toolbar. We have now successfully loaded the Massive Loop SDK. Let's go ahead and click on Camellia Rock. In the inspector, let's go to Add a Component. Here we can search for the avatar descriptor. Once we find it, let's add it to our prefab. Once applied, we can see that some new game objects have been added to Camellia Rock. Let's start by clicking on the eye game object. In your scene view, roughly position the eye anchor around the area of the eyes of our character. We also want to move it a bit in front of the nose. This is going to be the position of your camera. Next, let's select the left-hand anchor. This will represent the position of your controllers. So we'll need to position the anchor close to the area where the thumb meets the hand. We'll also need to rotate the Y channel -90 and the Z channel -90. The anchor's Z positive axis should now point down the hand and the Y positive axis in the direction your character is facing. Great. Let's go ahead and copy those values. In the upper right corner of our transform component, we can click the More Option button. Here, let's select Copy Component. Now let's move on and select our left laser start anchor. Under its transform component, let's click the More Option button. And this time, we will select the Paste Component values. Now let's go ahead and position the left laser start anchor to be more at the tip of our character's index finger. The last anchor we will look at is the seat anchor. This anchor depicts the point where your avatar will be seated when using stations in Massive Loop. So let's go ahead and select the seat anchor. And let's go ahead and position it around the pelvis and probably close to the upper thighs. Great. Now let's adjust our bounding box. Let's make sure our camera is in isometric mode. And let's switch it to the front view. We can now see and adjust our bounding box accurately to our character's height. Okay, great. With Camellia Rock selected, let's go to the inspector. Under the playable layers, we can see there are 2 slots open for controllers. If we hover over the base layer text, we will see a quick tip appear. This slot will hold the ML default locomotion controller. So let's select the little circle. Now find the ML default locomotion controller and select it. We can now see it appears in the slot. Let's do the same for the second layer. It looks like the slot is for the hand animations. Let's go ahead and select the circle and pick the ML default hand controller. It should appear in the slot as well. Okay, we can now move on to our blink properties. Under blink mechanic, let's hit the drop-down arrow. Massive Loop wants to know how will our character's blinks be controlled. Previously in CC4, we had set up a custom blend shape to control our eye blink. So let's select a blend shape. For the skinned mesh renderer, we'll need to have the mesh that holds that blend shape. So let's select our CC base body and drag it onto that slot. Next, let's look at the blink blend shape property and select the drop-down arrow. Scroll down until we find eye blink. Once done, we will keep its defaults and move on to eye fixation. Under the fixation properties, we will find fixation mechanics. Let's hit the drop down arrow. We can see different options on how to control the eyes. In Camellia Rock's case, her eye movements are driven by joints. So we will need to select the bone transform option. We should see some empty slots saying left eye and right eye. This is where our joints will go. So, under Camellia Rock's hierarchy, let's expand it until we locate the eye joints. Once we find them, we can drag the left and the right eye joint into their respective slots. We are now ready to set the eye look limits. In the max look right property, let's hit the modify button. Now, if any of the eyes flip out, we will need to fix them. We can do this by selecting the eye joint that's been affected, going to the inspector, and changing the rotational values back to what they should be. Once done, we should be able to continue from there. In the max look right property, let's click on modify. Now we need to figure out which axis rotates the eyes to look right. In our case, that's the Z channel. So let's put in a value of about 22. That looks about right. Let's uncheck the modify button and move on to max look left. Click on modify. Here, we can apply the same value we applied in the max look right, but making it opposite. So let's put in the value of -22. Uncheck modify. For max look up, click on modify, and in the X channel, let's add a value of about 9. That looks great. Uncheck modify, and let's do the same for max look down. Modify, maybe a value of, let's say, -12 in the X channel, and uncheck. Great, we have just finished our fixation values. We are now ready to work on our visemes. In the mouth properties section under mouth simulation mechanics, let's hit the drop down arrow and choose visemes, blend shapes. Much like the blink, we will need to select the mesh that has the blend shapes on them. Let's go ahead and select that game object and drag it onto the viseme skin mesh slot. Once done, let's hit the detect button. The Massive Loop SDK will try and detect the visemes for us. Now, it's not perfect, and in the case of Camellia, it got us about 40% of the way there. For the ones that are not correct, we can easily go to the slot affected, hit the drop-down arrow, and select the one that corresponds to that slot. I'm going to go ahead and pause this video and finish rehooking up our character's visemes. Great, now that we're done, let's go ahead and hit check performance. And if everything is green, we can move forward. Before we leave the inspector, let's scroll up to the top. There, you will see a property that reads overrides. Let's hit the drop-down arrow. At the bottom, let's hit apply all. Because we are not working in prefab mode, we will have to perform this action in order to save all the changes made to our prefab. Let's save our file. And we are now ready to upload this avatar. Before an avatar can be uploaded into Massive Loop, a unique profile or container for that avatar must be created. To do so, we'll need to open our browser and go to www.massiveloop.com. Here, we can sign into our account. Once we've signed in, let's navigate to the button that says Massive Loop. If we hit the drop-down arrow, we should see a selection for avatar. Go ahead and click on it. This should show a page that displays the currently uploaded avatars. On the left, you should see an option labeled My Avatars. If we click on it, the page will show all the avatars you have uploaded through your account. This makes it extremely easy to find and edit your avatar's profile. If we look to the top right, we will see a button that says Create Avatar. Let's go ahead and hit it. we can now fill out some general information about our avatar, like our avatar's name. For consistency, we will call ours Camellia Rock. Under category, let's make sure human. And under description, you can write anything you feel that will accurately describe your avatar. Once finished, let's click Create. The profile is created and we can now add a few more features to our avatar's profile. We can upload a thumbnail. Let's hit Browse. Let's find the file, select it, and hit Open. Now let's go to the Update button and click on that. We should see our thumbnail appear. We can also choose a status for our avatar. Click on Change, Publish. Under New Status, let's hit the drop-down arrow. Since this is the first time to upload this character, I will set her status to private. This will make it so that only I can select her in the Massive Loop Metaverse. Let's jump back into Unity. Navigate to Massive Loop on the Unity toolbar. Here we will find the control panel. Click it. You will be prompted to log into your Massive Loop account. Once finished, we can find the avatar icon and select it. We should now be able to see the avatar profile we created. If we look at the top, we can see which avatar is current. If you need to select another profile, you can always hit Change. We now need to tell the SDK which avatar prefab we would like to associate to this profile. So click on Select Avatar Prefab, find the Camellia Rock prefab and select it. Now we can hit the Build and Upload button. The SDK will now begin uploading our avatar to the Massive Loop Metaverse. Let's go check it out. Now it looks as if everything worked, except there's something going on with our mouth. That's not a problem. Since all the mouth movements for the Vizims are influenced by blend shapes, it's safe to assume it's the jawbone being driven by something else. Since we do not need the jawbone, we can go ahead and remove its link to the rig. Let's jump back into Unity. Select the Camellia Rock FBX. Now in the inspector, let's go to the Rig tab and let's hit Configure. Here we can select the head. We can see the jaw joint slot. Select it and hit None to remove that joint. Go ahead and hit Apply, and then let's save the file. Let's go back to the Massive Loop control panel and build and upload our character once more. When that's finished, we can jump back into the Massive Loop Metaverse and we can see our character is working just fine. Thank you for spending the time to go through the Massive Loop pipeline with me. I look forward to seeing you there and to see what remarkable avatars you create.